Yeah, my name is Michael Lang. I'm Vice Rector for Research and HR here at WU, and it's my pleasure to welcome you, in particular those of you who are maybe here for the first time at our campus. Yeah, you have come to listen to an interesting event, to an interesting debate, which is organized by our Competence Center, by our Center for Sustainability Transformation and Responsibility. And we are very proud to have this center. We already had a sustainability center at our university, which was very successful, but the relaunch has taken this spring, and the center had been further developed, so therefore the topics had been further developed. The center now deals also with the responsibility, deals with the social side of sustainability. The center has become more international, the center has become more academic, and I'm very important that we could convince two leading professors of our university, Sigrid Stagl and Günther Stahl, to take the lead here and to be responsible for the relaunch. So therefore I'm extremely happy that you have come to listen to this event and that the center has started to offer events like this, but many other activities. Yeah, having said that, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Ziliskaite, who will present the center before the real debate starts. Again, it's my pleasure to welcome you, and I wish you a fruitful evening, an interesting evening, an interesting debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such kind introduction. Can you hear me okay? I'm using the headset in the back. Yes, in that side of the back as well. So I would like to extend our very, very warm welcome on behalf of our center. And this includes the co-directors, Professor Günther Stahl and Professor Sigrid Stagl, as already mentioned. Also my office neighbor, Christian Rahmen, who is also the head of the RCE Vienna. And we have three really great, young, very dedicated people, Laura, Marlene, and Marius, without whose help this would not be possible. So thank you guys in advance for making even today's slides look better. And also Christoph, with whom we actually co-teach several courses here, including one class on sustainable development goals this semester. So I think I see some familiar faces. If you are our students, you did realize you get no extra credit for today's event, right? Just to make sure. Okay. So when we had started planning for the event back in the summer, somebody at WU told us, choose any topic you want, it'll be fine. Just make sure don't hold an event in English, because that brings down the audience members here in Vienna. But we thought, okay, we'll stick to our goal, because our goal was to be inclusive of people in Vienna who are non-German speakers, and possibly a lot of those people actually study at WU. But, you know, therefore we had very modest expectations. So we counted on 50, maybe 60 people in the audience. And I only agreed to moderate because I have a terrible stage fright. And I thought, 60 people, this is like a big classroom, I can handle that. And then on Friday, we received the update, 330 registrations. So Christian here just did a pet talk on me, you know, how to not pass out today. But I am very, very delighted to see you here. And seriously speaking, the language choice reflects our efforts to internationalize the research that we do here at WU. So it is a deliberate choice. And very briefly, a little more about what we do. So we are not a research institute, although there is, as already mentioned, the Research Institute for Managing Sustainability here at WU. But what we do as a competence center is to bundle the knowledge and allow for knowledge exchange by the intellectual community here at WU and beyond it. We also seek to disseminate the research produced here in the fields of sustainability and responsibility to the broader public. That is what hopefully is happening tonight. We also do research conferences, seminars, teaching workshops, and similar events. We also strongly support student-driven sustainability initiatives here on campus. So we have a whole website called Get Involved for that. And we're organizing an SDG day. So just yesterday, I was sitting with student representatives. I also see a few of you in the back, of different organizations, and they are very dedicated to run this voluntarily, and hopefully in May we have a whole full day dedicated for SDGs and organized by students. And the push for this actually came from last year's informal survey that we did when we had just started as a team. So we asked over 940 students here at WU if they knew what SDGs were. And we primed them with the word Nachhaltigkeit. We said, it's something related to Nachhaltigkeit. Do you know what that is? Around 10% knew. So 104 out of, well, closer to 11%. Now, this is the average number for most of the EU countries, for the general populations. So it's not surprising. But given that we are a higher education institution, we believe that we could and should do better in raising awareness. And our third pillar is to be the contact point to liaison between the staff, faculty, and students, as well as external stakeholders. And we are involved in several Austrian networks, sustainability networks, as well as in global sustainability networks. And just one more minute. So, as I said, we started recently. We're a small team, but we have big plans for 2020 as well. So we would like to start an initiative that would encourage faculty and staff to travel less or to travel greener. We would like to combine, gather, and collect sustainability teaching resources that we could then make publicly available through our online platforms. We want to work towards an SDG video series. And last but not least, we will be hosting next June a very big workshops for sustainability center heads from around the world, pretty much, over 100 different universities, who will be coming here to Vienna. And that is such a big event that we're co-hosting it with FH Wien and the Network for Business Sustainability. So, whoa, sorry. This is our PhD students' watch. I promised it would fall. You're okay, Marlene? Charge it off my salary? Okay. So SDGs, we are anchoring everything that we do in SDGs, of course, and we take the goal 17 very seriously. Does any of you know by heart which one 17 is? Yes, Partnerships for Sustainable Development. This is what tonight's event is all about. And before I invite our panelists on the stage, I like my boss, Günther Stahl, and co-director of START, to give a brief introduction to SDGs and their impact on business. So I hand over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, Professor Lang, for your welcoming words, and thanks also to Milda for organizing our first big event together with the marketing and communications team here. Big thanks to you as well. My name is Günther Stahl. I'm co-director of STAR, and looking at the group of distinguished panelists that we invited for today, who are all female, it appears that I'm the quota man. I don't know, is this proper English, the Quotenmann this evening, but I don't mind that at all. In fact, I think it's a good sign that so many brilliant women are moving into the sustainability field, because as we all know, women bring a slightly different perspective to business, at least this is my experience, a broader perspective, which is quite valuable when it comes to sustainability and corporate responsibility. And this actually leads me to the topic of this WU Matters event, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I hope that more than 10% of the audience knows what the SDGs are, is that right? Right, but in case, here's an overview of the SDGs. Now, it's been, I think, 4.5 years since the SDGs were launched, and companies are still trying to figure out what to make of the SDGs, how they can contribute to their achievement through their activities. Obviously, this is one question, but also how they can benefit from the SDGs, which begs the question, why should companies care about the SDGs in the first place? And as we will see this evening, the answer to this question is not as straightforward as it might seem, at least not to me. I recently had a very interesting debate with a group of executive MBA participants. I don't know, some of them may be here. I was invited to do a day on corporate responsibility and was giving some examples of companies that have embedded the SDGs into their business strategies and implemented so-called profit with purpose business models, for example, Unilever, and their sustainable living plan, their blueprint for addressing the pressing ecological and social challenges of this world. And one of the participants raised his hand, and I guess he wanted to be a bit provocative, and said, I'm an entrepreneur, I have my own business, why should I care about the SDGs, right? I'm not Mother Teresa, he said, I have to run a business. So basically his point was that it's not the role of business or business leaders to save the earth and to address the pressing global challenges. This is something that should be left to the non-profit sector, the Mother Teresas of the world, and maybe the politicians. And he's not alone with this opinion. Although I have to say, in this executive MBA class, his comments generated a fair amount of backlash and protest from the other students. But there are some very smart people, who have argued the same way. People like Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, who famously said, there's one and only one responsibility of business, and that is to make profits, as much money as possible for the shareholders, right? And everything else is irresponsible, or even, he said, immoral. In other words, companies or executives shouldn't be concerned about things like corporate responsibility or sustainability. That's not their business. They should be concerned with maximizing shareholder value, because that's their primary responsibility. In fact, their sole responsibility, according to Friedman and other free market economists, and the market will take care of the rest. Well, as we saw in the global economic crisis of 2008 and 2009, the market did not take care of the rest, and there's a growing number of companies that have realized that there's more to corporate responsibility than just maximizing profits, that they have to balance the financial interests of the shareholders with the needs of a much broader set of stakeholders. And companies are also beginning to see the benefits and the opportunities that the SDGs can offer. And what we see is that they are starting to commit to the SDGs. According to the UN Global Compact, more than 80% of its almost 10,000 corporate members have committed to advancing one or more of the SDGs. And a recent survey of Fortune 500 companies in the United States found that more than 2/3 of these companies claim that sustainability and corporate responsibility are among the core values and an important part of their mission, and that they are trying to find ways to advance the SDGs through their activities. Now, the cynics among you, or there are no cynics in the room, the skeptics, might say, this is all very well, but CEOs make lots of promises and lots of commitments that they don't necessarily keep. And I totally agree. There's a lot of window dressing going on in the sustainability area, lots of greenwashing. Actually, Milda told me the other day that the term greenwashing is outdated. The new term is SDG washing, right? So a lot of SDG washing going on and CEOs not walking the talk. A glaring example is Volkswagen. Volkswagen was a member of the UN Global Compact until shortly after the scandal. They are now delisted, but Volkswagen's core values are, does anyone know? Just curious. They are, I can't read them. Social responsibility, sustainability, and a spirit of partnership. And their mission statement says, Volkswagen is more than an employer. We are responsible for people, the economy, society, and the environment. And the mission statement ends with the phrase, integrity is at the heart of everything we do, which is a bit ironic in light of what happened. And here's an excerpt from Volkswagen's sustainability report, their Nachhaltigkeitsbericht, which states, let's see, Volkswagen is committed to the SDGs and blah, 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 and engaged in activities in support of sustainability, right? So looking at this, it's hard not to become a cynic, but it's of course not only Volkswagen that is not walking the talk. There are lots of other examples. And Mark Kramer and his colleagues found, and they did a study of 100 of the largest global companies that have committed to advancing the SDGs, and what they found was, I'm quoting, that the commitment of almost every company appears to be merely cosmetic. Existing CSR initiatives were simply relabeled, and few companies are doing anything new or different in their core business activities to advance the SDGs. And they also observed that in many cases, companies' core business activities even seem to contradict their commitments. And they cite ExxonMobil and Philip Morris as examples. So this is very sobering. But it's also clear that there are companies that are walking the talk, that pursue a broader mission than just making money and maximizing shareholder, and that have integrated this broader social mission or environmental considerations into their business models. Companies like Unilever or Indra Nooyi has done a really good job of transforming PepsiCo in the 12 years that she was at the helm of PepsiCo. Or Patagonia. How many of you know Patagonia? Almost everyone, okay. The global garment brand that uses 100% organic cotton and donates, I think, 10% of their revenues or of the profits to environmental charities. And they explicitly discourage consumers from buying their products because part of Patagonia's mission is to encourage responsible consumption, one of the SDGs. And these companies engage in these activities not only for ethical reasons, because they think that's the right thing to do, but they do it because stakeholders demand it. There's increasing pressure now from stakeholder activists, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, but also people like yourself, consumers, investors, shareholder activists. The companies engage in these activities. And ultimately, they do it because there are real business benefits associated with that, as a growing body of empirical research shows, including here the survey conducted by McKinsey. So there are real business benefits, some of them tangible, some of them intangible. For example, according to Paul Polman, the Unilever CEO, Unilever created twice the market growth and 300% shareholder return in the 10 years after implementing its sustainable living plan. But he also noted this is not why they have the sustainable living plan, to make profits. Profits are only a means to an end. He said, we cannot fulfill our broader social mission unless we are highly profitable and deliver an appropriate amount of returns to our shareholders. Right? So there are companies have different philosophies and they have different approaches to corporate sustainability and responsibility, and they are engaging in these activities for different motives. And I found in my research, if you allow me to share this with you, that essentially companies engage in CSR and sustainability for three broad reasons. One is compliance, to reduce legal and reputational risks, also financial risks. For example, avoid litigation costs associated with lawsuits for harmful environmental behavior, etc. And even Milton Friedman said that this is acceptable. Companies should do that, if it reduces risk. The second reason that we found is the infamous business case. So the idea that engaging in responsible or sustainable activities has a direct impact on the bottom line, as exemplified by the former CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt, saying, "We are investing in environmentally cleaner technology, not because it's trendy or moral or ethical, but because it will help us increase our revenues and our profits." And then we found another reason. We found that some companies engage in these activities simply because they believe it's the right thing to do, because it's consistent with their core values and their mission and how they want to operate. An example is Johnson & Johnson, and they have a long track record of demonstrating that they are walking the talk, for example, in the Tylenol crisis. And usually companies engage in these activities. It's a combination of these motives, I would say. And actually there's another motive, but it's rarely, ever articulated in this way by business leaders. But if we ask Paul Polman, the Unilever CEO, why he committed Unilever to advancing the SDGs and help tackle the grand societal challenges that we face, he would probably give the same answer that George Mallory, the Everest pioneer, gave when he was asked why he was so obsessed with climbing Everest. Does anyone know what his answer was? He said, because it's there. This momentous challenge is there and we cannot ignore it. And Paul Polman would probably say the same. They would say, we are engaging in these activities because these problems are there. Problems like environmental degradation, climate change, they are very real. They cannot be denied anymore. And they are threatening the future of life on this planet and the well-being of future generations. And companies like Unilever can no longer be a bystander and pretend that these problems do not exist. They have a moral responsibility, and not only a responsibility. I think the better argument is actually, because what is moral is very much in the eye of the beholder, but the better argument is that they have the power, they have the resources, and they have the capabilities to actually address these global challenges, more so than the public sector and the non-profit sector, probably. My former INSEAD colleague and friend Ilya Mihov gave a very good talk at last year's Force for Good conference, in which he talked about the transformative power of business. And he concluded by saying that, love them or hate them, but private sector companies are probably the best hope we have, in finding solutions to the world's most pressing problems, because they are catalysts for innovation and change. And I tend to agree with that. In fact, tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, we are hosting a research conference here at WU with a focus on responsible innovation, in which some of the world's leading scholars in this area will talk about how private sector companies can help tackle, the grand societal challenges of our time. Now, it's clear that the ambitious goals, formulated in the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 will only be possible through concerted efforts by national governments, civil society organizations like NGOs, and the private sector. But of these three institutions, I think the private sector companies are probably the most powerful engine for innovation and change. And we can already see it. There are very encouraging signs, as we will see this evening, that responsible innovation is happening on all fronts, across all sectors and industries, even industries that are considered problem industries like automotive or oil companies, for the simple reason, because if they don't innovate and change, they will be extinct in a couple of years. But I don't want to preempt the discussion. I will pass the floor on to Milda again, and then our distinguished panelists. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Günther. So without further ado, I'll invite all the panelists to take seats, and I'll briefly present you afterwards. And I know from experience in this room that if you're sitting way in the back, you may not be able to see the panelists that well, so perhaps we could keep the slides throughout the event. Is that okay? Or you see okay? Okay. All right. So should I be in the middle? You'll be fine? Okay. Okay. So I'll go very briefly on alphabetically, but by first names. Okay? That's the Lithuanian way to do this. Okay. So Brigitte Bichler, to my right, far right, holds the role of Senior Advisor Environment at OMV. And among other things, she advises the company's senior management on the climate change-related risks and opportunities. And interestingly, you started your career in a land very far away, very long time ago, over 20 years ago, in Chile, working on the EU project there. And after returning to Austria, she worked for Austrian Federal Environmental Agency and joined OMV in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, and has been the project manager for several different initiatives before the current position. And I'd also like to mention the incredible track of your master's degrees. So from industrial environmental protection, master's in engineering, to master's in interdisciplinary Balkan studies. And the MBA energy management from here, the WU Executive Academy as well. I believe we're right to assume, as Günther said, there may be some Executive Academy students in the audience as well, maybe? Great, thank you for being here. And we have Elisa Eichinger, a Director of Social Innovation at Deloitte Consulting here in Austria. She's been at Deloitte since 2006, eight. I thought in 8 you took over the social innovation part. Okay, so it's 2008. And as I said, Director of Social Innovation Strategy with focus on human resource management. And when we talked briefly before the event, Elisa told me that she kind of got into the HRM without having planned for it, as many of us do in our careers, and as many of you students will find out sooner or later. But I'm sure you will notice, what stood out for me is how passionate she really is about human resource management from the social sustainability perspective. So she's really concerned with the urgent issues concerning the labor market transformations of today, technology, demographics change. And I really look forward to hear more about that. And she has a degree in Betriebswirtschaft here at WU, which is really hard for me to translate. I think it's business administration. Yes. WU website says business economics and social sciences. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And right next to me, Teresa Imre, also a WU alumna, right? And you obtained your degree in SEEP for... Not quite, not yet. Ooh.
Almost.
Ooh. Is there likelihood that your master thesis supervisor is sitting next to me too?
Yes, that is very correct. No.
I'd be very careful about what you say here
definitely,
tonight.
Highly.
But for those of you who don't know, the WU SEEP Master's Program is a Master's in Socio-Ecological Economics and Policy. But today, Teresa is here in her role as a founder and managing director of Markta. Perhaps some of you have already ordered from them. They are the online platform, virtual distribution platform for regional foods, right? And I will leave it up to Teresa to explain more their relationship with the SDGs, but I also have 2 facts that I found very interesting about your experiences. So one, she is an acknowledged, achieved food blogger. And her former food blog, and this is for non-German speakers in the room, was called one word, eingebrockt und ausgeloffelt.com. And another interesting fact is that she's worked with the UN Environment Programme and the Alpine Convention on the topic of female mountain farmers and sustainable development in Austria, which I find fascinating because I come from a country where the highest hill is 200 meters. So for me, being a mountain farmer is about as exotic as being an astronaut. So. And last but not least, so the co-director of STAR right here at WU and my second boss, Sigrid Stagel. And if I had to describe all her academic achievements, we'd take another half an hour. So I'll also stick to just 2 facts. 2 weeks ago, she gave a talk right here in this venue on the role of economics research in the climate change debate. And the room was filled to the very end, and the room next door was also filled, and they had a screen there. So I think that just says enough about Sigrid. And the second fact, as I said, since March 1st, she's my boss. And I can tell you she definitely leads by example. So I am very, very honored to have all of you ladies here. I'm not sure, Sigrid, if you can be seen from that corner of the classroom. Should we, of the hall, should we perhaps switch? Because I'm a little less important. Oh.
That's difficult.
Is that okay? Right. I'm delighted to have all of you here, and I think you'll notice today the diversity of the backgrounds, professional backgrounds. So, Teresa being the founder of her own startup, Brigitte working for one of the largest corporations in Austria in oil industry, and Teresa and Elisa possibly more on the social and environmental side on the sustainability, and Sigrid and Brigitte clearly concerned with climate change and environmental sustainability. Sigrid, the only academic, and 3 ladies with years-long experience in industry. And as Günther said, we've only noticed this very recently, that we are the all-female panel. And I went back to the WU Matters archives all the way to 2016, and I confirmed that. So good for us. This wasn't really planned, but I think we're now at the level of NASA, who had the first all-female spacewalk a month ago, except our spacesuits did not cost $12 million each, right? Okay. So I'll start with Sigrid. What is the role of business in achieving the SDGs?
Mm-hmm. It's a bit difficult for me to say because I'm an economist, and success of businesses, individual companies, is not really a category. We normally talk about sectors, we talk about the macroeconomy. But we have a very poor understanding of performance of individual companies, as you could see with the quote from The Economist. I want to talk a bit about that framing, because the assumption behind that quote is that markets are sort of a neutral place where supply meets demand and then the price comes up, and that is all sort of neutral. It's non-normative. And I want to challenge that, because I think it's deeply normative. And the markets, in my framing, where I come from as an institutional economist, markets are sets of social institutions. And social institutions can be laws, international conventions, they can be norms, and so on. So they can be codified formal rules or informal rules. But without these rules, markets can't function. And actually, they don't even exist without social institutions. And that's actually a set of social institutions that what markets are. So how do these sets of institutions come about? Well, normally, of course, at the time, whenever we are setting up rules, we're looking at the grand societal challenges. They are evolving over time. They're changing over time. And I would argue that the most of the rules that have been set up that businesses are working under at the moment were set up at a time where the societal challenges were slightly different than today. And we're really struggling with overcoming that inertia so that the rules are changed so that they are in line with today's challenges. And of course, the UN SDGs is a big step in that direction. And it's often been complained that, well, they are toothless, and I mean, they're just like dimensions. What does that matter? Well, it's not just 17 sort of dimensions. On the one hand, to name them is an achievement, and to agree on that, and governments to agree that these are the most important ones. But of course, there are also 169 criteria underlying it, and then there are over 200 indicators of how they are being measured. So it's quite operational, actually. And and then there's also the pie chart, which is sort of like a cake, which indicates a hierarchy between them. Mm-hmm. And that hierarchy is very much in line with my way of thinking as an ecological economist, where we have sort of the biophysical basis, all the green and the blue ones here, as sort of the base, and economic production that challenges and that damages the very basis is actually undermining its own roots. Yeah? So it can be used, this sustainable development framing, in a very potent way. Coming back to markets, of course, the SDGs need to be written, codified into national laws and so on, and this is ongoing. It's a bit slow, but this is what we really need, so that the institutions that make up markets are in line with the SDGs, and hence are guaranteeing that we are achieving the SDGs. But they're not separate from markets. They are very much part of markets. In Friedman's thinking is companies are trying to be as successful as possible, success probably being defined as profits, and then from the profits they would redistribute according to the shareholders' moral and societal values according to environmental or social criteria. But that is assuming that the societal goals are separate from the businesses, while I would argue that they are built into the markets. And then another framing, because that's all I can do, because I don't know much about businesses, is the governance process. In economics, we often assume that, well, we are undertaking economic analysis, we are devising a brilliant instrument, a policy instrument, and we are publishing that, and the policymakers will read that, pick it up, and implement it. And of course, that's not how it happens, because there is a whole governance process, and we're learning from international relations and political science that there are lots of actors that are engaging in this governance process, and businesses are an important part of that governance process. They have the power, the capability, and the resources for shifting that. So this is why I think that the socio-ecological transformation that we need in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals will not be achieved without the power of business.
Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful. Yeah, well, feel free. Yeah, So building upon that, I'll ask all three of you, Brigitte, Lisa, and Teresa, what role do your companies, the companies you work for, play in achieving the SDGs? But I don't want to talk about the general, all SDGs together. If you could choose just one or two concrete examples where you believe your company is making a real progress. So maybe start with Brigitte.
Yeah, thank you, Milde. Thank you for your introduction. You're doing a really wonderful job. You're so charming. It's fantastic. Good evening also to the audience from my side. The way how I see the SDGs, so also I personally see the SDGs, is for me kind of mobilization of global efforts in order to achieve a common goals and common targets, kind of universal agreement on where we should go and what we should achieve by 2030 in that case. And business is definitely a vital part next to governments and civil society. It's not only business, all three of them must work together. And OMV is a large international acting company, for sure can generate a large positive impact towards achieving the SDGs. The company's contribution could be first with their core activities. They can also do impact measurements in terms of how they impact SDGs and what they can achieve in terms of goal setting, target setting, and they can also transparently communicate what they are actually doing and achieving. And I don't want to go into our sustainability strategy, but for sure we have a sustainability strategy. We are UN Global Compact endorser since 2005, so we are already since decades defining sustainability targets which are built into the strategy of the company. And we are also checking where we have an impact in achieving the SDGs. It's all transparently communicated in our reports. Everything can be found in the internet. Regarding the SDG examples and where we make a progress and impact, I would like to choose the 3 SDGs which are closely related to energy. This is SDG 7, which is the achieve universal access to energy. Then a part of SDG 3, reduce severe health impacts of air pollution. And then SDG 13, climate action. And to all of those, we have a significant impact. To the first one, SDG 7, it's about energy security and affordability of energy supplies. OMV is an energy supplier, and our social responsibility is to ensure Versorgungssicherheit, energy security for the people we supply with energy. So this is something where we link one SDG to our core business. A part of SDG 7 is also energy efficiency. I'm an engineer, I always talk a little bit about this stuff as well. Energy efficiency is extremely important to us. We have extreme high energy costs in our refineries, for example, so we have an economic case behind reducing energy consumption and reducing emissions. So here we contribute to the SDG 7 as well. When it comes to the SDG 3, less air pollution, our strong focus is on natural gas as the cleanest fossil fuel. It doesn't generate particulate matter. When you burn it, it can contribute supplying energy from billions of people which still use wood or animal waste for providing energy for cooking. So there's also a big contribution in less air pollution. And SDG 13, for sure, climate action, we have an extremely strong role here. This is completely integrated into our core business. It affects our core business, and we have to deliver definitely on the SDG 13, as Mr. Stahl also said in the beginning. Fossil fuel companies, if they don't act in a near-time future to build in low-carbon, zero-carbon products in the portfolio, they will be out of the market. And OMV puts a strong focus in step-by-step developing and implementing a low and zero-carbon portfolio.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, if I take on the thread, maybe just to briefly explain what it is I actually do. I work for Deloitte. I'm an HR consultant there, and I have been for 12 years. Deloitte is one of the largest, if not the largest, professional services firm worldwide. And what I have been doing for 12 years is basically help companies on how to react on changes within the world of work, but do it in a labor market sustainable way. So to the benefit of everybody, to the companies themselves, as well to the individuals that work there, and ultimately for the labor market. And I would say, or maybe to put your initial question right, social innovation didn't exist, or the field of social innovation didn't exist probably 4 years ago at Deloitte. It was a little bit of a common effort of myself and my team or teams that work within that field. And I think where we contribute, of course we do things at Deloitte as well, but that's probably not my area of expertise. But I would say the SDG we probably contribute the most to is equal opportunities. And just to give you an example, or just to give you a few statistics, Austria, in the comparison to the rest of the EU countries, still has got a long way to go when it comes to gender equality. And one fact that you can base it on is that the career paths of women basically go through a leaky pipeline. So even though we've got nearly 50% of the working population is female, even in the middle management you can see that only 1 out of 7 positions is filled by a female. And in top management positions it's even only 5 out of 100. That leads to the fact that women are on average paid 20% less than their male colleagues are. One thing that doesn't really contribute to closing the gender pay gap is that we probably have the highest amount of part-time workers in the EU comparison. And all those facts lead to the fact that the gender pension gap is even up to 60% between men and women. So the
danger of a woman in retirement suffering from poverty is significantly higher than a male's danger. And what we see and what we have helped companies to realize is that it just makes business sense to work on gender parity. And why should they do it? Not necessarily out of the goodness of their hearts, because ultimately, as we've heard, companies are economic systems, so they work on pure economic factors. But why should they do it? Because it just does not make business sense to not make use out of the full potential of the labor market if we already know that more than 50% of the university graduates are women.
Excellent, thank you. And Teresa, you're from a very different
angle, and I think maybe a little bit more relating, especially for students at the moment. I think it is maybe starting from why did I do that? I myself grew up on the countryside and perceived, I think, many things in our global current economy as dangerous. As a child, I think sometimes you're quite naive and you want equality above all. And I always kept myself this approach towards building up structures that actually improve our systems and make things more equal and more sustainable. So it is something I inherited somehow, and actually I then thought about how do I make an impact as a person? How can I actually engage myself in doing something good? And at the beginning, I was thinking a lot about you have to understand the system as it is at the moment. And I studied business administration in the beginning in my bachelor's here, and then actually worked at a business consultancy for 4 years, working on, research projects as well with business development and startups, but just always perceiving how does the system work today. And then with my passion towards food, and I do believe that food is something where we can all relate to, especially concerning sustainable consumption. It is one of the basic things we need every day. Everybody needs to eat. And this was then somehow something that came into my mind. This is a topic that I want to revolve my action about. So it started actually with the food blog, which you mentioned before. We started that in 2015, I would say, and perceived so many consumers actually wanting to know more about this topic, how a regional producers doing stuff. So how do local, farmers work? How do people actually have an urge to actually get a lot more in contact with their food? So this was a bit more the consumption side. But the interesting thing was that we won actually 2 awards with this food blog, and all of a sudden so many small-scale family producers contacted us because they just needed more assistance in how to promote themselves online. So this was a little bit this topic I perceived somehow. And then I was, of course, thinking about, okay, how can I revolve actually a business around that? Because I do believe that, yes, you can address politics to change the system. You can address the consumer as well in terms of responsibility. But you also have to provide solutions that actually link this gap between politics saying what do we need and what actually frameworks should we also provide. So this is definitely one level of responsibility. But it's not alone the politics to say consumers want cheap meat. That's basically sometimes the, I would say, O-tone actually, which we have in our current agricultural structures, where you say you just have to provide cheap food for the masses. And I do believe this is not the only way of passing on this responsibility, saying if the consumer wants cheap meats, supermarkets provide it. I do believe that actually we need actually transformation within the system in terms of sustainable agriculture production in general. But nevertheless, this was actually the basis of all these things that revolved in my head around, that it's just necessary to link the gap between consumers and producers, basically. Because if you have all these family businesses out there in Austria, there are 160,000 agriculture producers. So we are a country that is already still actually quite small structures, especially if you compare it to Germany or France or wherever. So Austria has a potential. There are still a lot of family farms out there with, I think, almost 3,000 closing every year. So there is definitely a need to provide better solutions for these family farms to get their products from the countryside to the city. And this is basically what Markta builds on. We built now for 3 years a platform which is kind of a virtual farmers market. So all the different producers have their own profiles on there and provide the information and also the products directly on the platform. And starting with Markta, we started more with the digital version, but now we also actually get deep into the infrastructure. And that links actually to your initial question, what SDG goals do we address? I do believe we address most of them actually, because it started so much around also actually having the pleasure to attend this SEEP Master and actually learn so much about what is needed to change the system. And I did that parallel to actually building Markta, doing my Bildungskarenz, which was a great opportunity, doing both at the same time. Because on the one hand, I had the information and the knowledge I gained from university, how system transformation must be done, or at least what different areas have to be addressed. And then on the other side, I had the practice. So I really profited from both of those sides very much. And we now address, basically, because you asked us to pick out some of the SDGs, I would definitely say it's number 11 with the sustainable consumption in general. So we work very much towards also reusable of packaging materials. So we have Pfand. I don't know what Pfand in English is. Can you help me out? Or
return. What is? I also.
So the glass bottles are washed, of course, like not in the supermarket as of today, where they actually moved to glass bottles, but they're single use, which doesn't make a sense at all. But we actually have every step of the process is, in terms of how I perceive a circular production, food is actually integrated already with our systems. So this is on the one hand that we really try to foster this sustainable consumption part, and on the other hand also promoting sustainability in cities and infrastructure, because I do believe one of the biggest things I need to address with this enterprise is actually the type of transport costs. So we have our food and our global food production are moved around the world. We don't sometimes even know where to. And this is definitely what there is a lot of passion within myself, because I just don't think it's fair and it doesn't make any sense. And so many consumers, thank God, pick up on that line. So we do also cluster and bundle our packages with pickup stations. This is actually something we're trying to launch at WU very soon, so that we actually do not do the home delivery itself, which is one of the options, but also bundle the packages in terms of saving the different transport ways here as well.
And that's also the SDG related to sustainable cities.
Yes, so this is SDG number 12.
Number 12, exactly. And I promise I will look up how to say Pfand in English for the next few matters.
Yes.
Actually, my next question was kind of answered. I wanted to ask, why should companies really care? But I think we got quite a few perspectives on that. So I'll go ahead and move to a question directly to Brigitte. Now, OMV is a very particular case, and I'm sure that many people, who are concerned with sustainable development, likely also in this audience, see that oil industry is a major problem, not part of a solution. And as Günther mentioned, there have been efforts to reshape itself, but public skepticism is understandable, and I'll just try to save you from the question that will probably come from the audience anyways, about the SDG washing. And ask you up front, what difference do SDGs make at OMV beyond your immediate team? So your team is clearly passionate about it. How about beyond it? And is there real concern beside the reputational aspect or image enhancement?
Referring to the last part of your question, if there is a concern which goes beyond any reputational or image aspect, I mean, the answer is clearly yes, it is, and it must be. I mean, the times where you can do greenwashings are over. I mean, companies, what is greenwashing? Companies pretend that their products or activities are environmental friendly in case they are not, so you're just putting a kind of green curtain in front of your activities. These times are over. There's such a huge scrutiny from stakeholders on what you do and how you do. There is a huge scrutiny from investor side, from the ESG rating agencies, from NGOs, from the regulators. So whatever you are doing, you have to be transparent about your impacts and your performance. Each ton of CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions generated by operations, by our supply chain, even by the product use or product processing of OMV Group is public. The data is there, so we are talking and showing our impacts, and we are also talking and showing our contribution to mitigate and reduce also the climate change impact of OMV. So the SDGs as universal agreements, so if you want to have a sustainability agenda built in your strategy, you will have to orient yourself into a certain framework. 2005 it was the UN Global Compact, then you have the Millennium Development Goals, and now we have the SDGs. So we orient our sustainability activities towards these SDGs, and out of the 17 SDGs we are contributing to 11 of them, and we are documenting this in a very transparent way. Even there's a legal requirement now for the large companies to publish non-financial reports, as you all know. This is all externally assured and audited by companies like Deloitte or others. So the scrutiny is extremely high. There is actually no space anymore for any greenwashing. When it comes to this, the public debate about fossil fuel companies, the business model of OMV is to be a reliable energy supplier and to ensure the energy security of the people. Yes, our majority of the product portfolio of OMV is still based on fossil fuels because they are still needed. The fossil fuels are still here because there's a huge demand. Our industry, the aviation, the heavy-duty trucks, the maritime transport, all runs on fossil fuels, and this will not go away from one day to the other. So there will be a transition period, and for everybody it's clear, also for OMV it's clear that the transition is going towards the agreements of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So I don't see, for me personally, working in that field in the company, and now being also member of the team, which is now newly set up, a new organization focusing on new energy solutions, there's a huge drive inside the company now. Because we are not starting now, we started many years ago. We have, for example, I have to give you some figures. Since 2010, we have saved 2.2 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. This is a huge number via concrete projects, not by shutting down facilities. Yeah. This is equivalent to the amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated by 1 million people annually. 1 million Austrians, so this amount of greenhouse gas emissions annually produced, we have already saved since 2010. So we have a decarbonization policy for our own operations. We have a decarbonization policy for our products. We want to produce more petrochemical, not burning it, so crude oil to petrochemicals. I don't know if the audience know, we already have established 560 e-charging stations in Austria, and we have an agenda to further develop this. We are pushing natural gas because natural gas, if you phase out coal, coal generates 30% of global CO2 emissions. If you phase out coal, replace it with gas, you already achieve a big step. But still, the heavy-duty trucks, the maritime traffic, the planes will still fly with fossil fuels for some time. Yeah? So therefore, fossil fuels will stay in our portfolio for a certain time. At the same time, we are evolving and developing our low-carbon agenda.
So long-term transition and short-term transparency. Right? For
exactly.
starting now.
Exactly.
And
so there is actually no trade-off between the topics of climate objectives, delivering on energy access or energy security, and air pollution. All of them have to be fulfilled at the same time. Yeah?
Thank you.
People also need energy, and there are still millions of people who don't have access to electricity or still cook with woods or with animal dung. So there are still a lot of people in the globe which have to achieve access to clean energy.
Thank you, thank you. And Elisa, how about the consulting work? Because Brigitte mentioned, you could serve as auditors or consultants to other companies. Is there increasing interest that you know of in companies of asking, give us advice on how to really implement the SDGs, not just write them in the reports?
Absolutely. Maybe to probably briefly go back to the question that we've kind of already answered, why should companies care? I think one, from my perspective, very important force is the labor market. And I think that's something, or two forces. I think the labor market and the investors/consumers that deliberately decide whether they collaborate with a company or not. Back to the labor market, what we've seen for years now, because we have surveyed the millennials and the Generation Z now for over 10 years, and the main question that we have is what makes a satisfactory work relationship for them, and what do they look for at an employer. And what we figured out is that lots of the millennials, especially over the last few years, have lost significant lack of trust in political systems and political decision makers. Because they have the feeling that political systems lack the responsibility to find answers on socio-political and social issues that we face. And that leads to the fact that they more and more turn to companies and see the responsibility within companies and their power to find answers to those changes. And because they don't find it in the or I believe, that's my hypothesis, because they don't find companies that severely work on those answers, that's probably one of the reasons that triggered the intensive startup scene or the growth of the startup scene and the social entrepreneurship, because you just get self-employed. So I think lots and lots of companies feel the pressure on the labor market, and this is why they should care. Back to your question, there is absolutely more and more interest, back to probably my field of expertise, whereas 5 years ago there wasn't a huge interest in how to strategically win women for management position or top leadership positions. More and more companies do now, for example, and the reason why they do it is because there is the force of legislation, there is the force of investors, there's the force of the labor market, consumers care, and they sometimes forget or are not aware of how transparent they are. So a fig leaf is not enough. And very often it's difficult for companies to find within their own systems to find the right answers and the right procedures on how to really sustainably tackle those issues. So I couldn't say like by heart how my competitors deal with it, but I think usually consulting companies work very simple. They are a source of innovation as long as there is a market for it. So, and as long as there is young, capable, interested people that are willing to tackle those issues and create innovation.
Thank you. So I'm very glad you mentioned satisfied millennials, because I think according to some counts, I'm still right on the edge of belonging to that generation, so thank you. Sigrid, why don't I leave the pleasure for you to comment on any of the two answers, perhaps not into too much detail because of time, but then also if you want to lead into the question of what are the innovative aspects of SDGs. So I mean in comparison to the previous practices in corporate sustainability or CSR, what is so innovative about SDG framework in particular?
I'll try to comment a little bit before, or to start with that. Again, as an economist, I have a very simple understanding of businesses. And what I see is that there are some businesses that are sort of set up as a sustainability-oriented undertaking. And they are started up because their founders or whoever starts it wants to do something to support sustainable development. So their very purpose is actually to be sustainable. Yeah? So that's one group. We probably want to see more of them. We want them to flourish. So we would need institutions that support them. Then there is another group of companies who are at the moment maybe advising businesses to improve profits or some narrow range of financial success, but maybe they could extend the range along the lines of sustainable development goals and change their core business rather easily. Although it is an effort, it takes a time to change the routines and so on, but it's possible to change the core business. Third group of businesses where it's probably really hard because the core business is actually part of the challenge to sustainability. And there's the question, do they change in terms of adding new business lines fast enough? And is the scale sufficient? And there I'm wondering, and maybe if I can ask you, what you've said about the processes, that all makes perfect sense to respond to the challenges. But I'm just wondering about the scale and the speed of it. Is it possible, for example, for OMV to contribute to the decarbonization that we need globally within the next 10 years, minus 50% of CO2 emissions? Yes, of course, switching over from coal to gas reduces the carbon intensity by 50%, but coal is not exactly in the portfolio. But where are the company resources at the moment being invested? There are still gas fields being explored as a bridging technology, but that's actually building up this old fossil fuel-oriented business still. Shouldn't we really move over to a regenerative business model? Why are we wasting time with a bridging technology? Yeah, the question is basically scale and speed. And yeah, that would be my comment to that.
I think that's the, when you say the bridging technology, yeah, you for sure mean mainly natural gas, yeah, which we promote as a bridging technology towards a future where we produce our electricity based on renewable fuels. Yes, this is needed. It will be needed even if you have a country running completely on renewable electricity production like solar and wind. You need a technology which can cover the base load when the wind is not blowing or when the sun doesn't shine. So natural gas will be always needed in generating the electricity needed from a country, at least on a base load. Fossil fuels, crude oil or natural gas per se are not bad products. The problem you can generate when you burn them and you create the CO2 emissions. So you can also do different things with crude oil. I mean, crude oil is nearly everywhere. In the petrochemical industry, you produce products which are not burnt, so contribute to decarbonizing, but you still need crude oil. In medicaments, aspirin, in each medicament like antibiotica, there's crude oil in it. So crude oil is a very valuable product. The same is valid for natural gas. Natural gas is a feedstock for many industries. Methanol is produced purely out of natural gas, and methanol is used for a lot of other feedstock into the chemical industry. So there will be a need for fossil fuels. It will be a clear reduction of the direct burning and generating of emissions. However, you still need the resource natural gas. And it will be also needed in terms of providing energy for mobility, for homes, for cooking, for the industry. Look at the increase of the global population, 9 billion people in 2040. And when you look at the figures from Africa, 15 people out of 1,000 people currently have a car, very bad efficient car. So there is will be huge development and a huge energy need. The development will be different, more energy efficient hopefully, and less carbon intense. Yeah? So I fully believe that you need the fossil fuel still as the so-called bridging technology. For sure, the pace and the scale, you can always accelerate. But the big problem for fossil fuel companies is in what direction. The future is extremely uncertain. So what pathway you take? So you have to test, you have to do this and do this. You have to develop these activities and this strategy, and this is what we're currently doing. And OMV will definitely increase the pace of developing these pathways. Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm struggling with, that the assumption is that African countries will follow sort of the same development path that we have. They will also want to have cars. They will have cars. We should still keep our cars instead of moving over in grand scale to public transport. And the few cars that we still have should be probably electrical powered, but not one-to-one replacement. So that's a completely different way of being mobile. Thinking about being mobile actually as the goal and not thinking about liters of oil, cubic meters of gas or cars or heating units. So a real we think that is really initiated and needed when we want to and have to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't think we can achieve that by being a bit more efficient.
Right.
And this is what's really needed for achieving that.
Yeah,
that's the transformative power.
I fully agree with you. When you talk about private mobility, this will change very fast. And you see all the decisions made now from the big automotive company, from Tesla building this mega factory in Berlin. There will be huge change very fast. However, there is also industry. There is also heavy-duty traffic, maritime traffic. Planes will not fly electric for a very long time. I can be sure the batteries will be still very heavy, and weight is everything in the aviation. So there will be sectors which still rely and need fossil fuels because the technology is still not there. For the private mobility, I fully agree. There will be fast change coming, yeah, definitely. And OMV is investing in charging stations. We want to build up huge networks of charging stations. You can already charge electric car if you have one at an OMV filling station. So we are going in this direction. The pace can be improved, definitely. However, don't forget the other sectors. Private mobility is one sector, but the other sectors will still need fossil fuels until the technology is there, which can be applied also in that sectors.
Thank you. We'll have time for discussion. Would you like to comment on the innovation side? Or I may switch my question to an SDG impact, actually. Since, because given time, I think people may be interested in, are there concrete ways to measure the impact that companies can use? So first Sigrid, and then perhaps any of your experiences as well.
Well, I would like to hear from the companies how they're measuring it
then we
first.
can, I know Teresa does use concrete measures,
Yes, I think actually it's from, it's difficult on the one hand because you're a startup, you have limited resources and you have to focus on somehow to survive. That's definitely the baseline of everything. And nevertheless, I do believe that there's a lot of going in impact investment. I think it's a very small sector, but I do believe that a lot of people who think that their money should be used wisely and also want to actually benefit the economy and businesses over the whole project, actually, or not the project, but actually the economy. I believe that impact measurement is essential for everything we do. We cannot do it in a detail that we want maybe even learn at university, I would say. But what we use is, for example, one of the frameworks, it's called IRIS. It's on an impact measurement framework, which also defines a lot of different goals on how can you actually measure the activities of your business and relate them to the KPIs that you also have to provide to investors. Because one of the things you also addressed is, and which is the most difficult thing at the moment for us as a startup. We try to do something I think really good and have a very, very good value in the core. But the problem is we operate in a system which is not ready for us. This is definitely what I perceive. I work with banks and I have to basically only provide the numbers concerning related to profit, revenues, cost cutting, etc. So everything has to actually at the moment run down to the business model that works, which I completely understand. We are in a capitalist neoliberalist economy, which may also change, I hope, for the future. But at the moment it's not there. And how do we actually get out there and try to, from within, burst out this bubble, is actually talking about it, communicating, finding people, and building up this strength in terms of network. And I think here, impact measurement are also addressing and actually being able to name where does your company or where does your startup, in our case, actually do good, and can you actually relate that to also numbers in the business plan, because this is what everybody is used to, and this is what everybody also always wants to hear about and talk about, and especially, I don't know, there are so many people also telling me I should do something more easier because I'm passionate and whatever I should do, it's just go aim for something simple. But I do believe, and this is definitely also me as a person, you can't just address the problem at one point. I think things have to be addressed on many levels, and this is where impact measurement does help, because then you can actually talk about the different areas you address.
And you mentioned to me before that IRIS is particularly useful for the smaller companies, right?
Yes,
or
it was
startups.
developed by the GIN. The GIN is the Global Impact and Measurement Network. So there are people out there. It's not just philanthropy which actually addresses the sustainable factor. There are impact investors. They're scarce. It's difficult, definitely, and you have to run from one to another. But I do believe that there's definitely also a growing trend, especially towards fund investment, for example, which is applied for one of the newest actually funds for social enterprises in Austria. It was launched just this summer. This is actually something I think very special. We do not really have financing means for companies that do not only orientate for profit. And this is definitely the most troubling thing if that is the basic value that is always being assessed. And we have to move towards different assessment schemes, and this is definitely what you also addressed with the frameworks and the legal regulations actually promoting or hindering certain trends, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to have about 10 minutes for audience questions, so I'll just ask one last question because it was sent to me by one of our students, and I find it so nice that they were so interested in this talk, they actually bombarded us with emails. And I could only choose one that I find, as a closing statement in itself, in a way. So, and I'll ask each one of you to answer it very, very briefly. What is it that drives the positive change? Is it individual leaders? Is it systems, educational institutions like WU, the UN, Elon Musk, Greta? So, for you personally, what is the driving force? And Elisa, we could start with you.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think it's actually a combination of all of those forces. And I think I'll try to keep it as short as possible, but I think one very important thing that we have to realize is that economical systems, political systems, ecological systems, individual systems, they're not separate systems. They communicate with each other and they influence each other. And I don't know who mentioned it today already, companies are not recipients of political decisions. They're very important stakeholders that by their action shape political priorities. And it's the same for consumers. They are not recipients of companies' decisions. They are very important stakeholders and they shape economic priorities. So I think ultimately it's probably, I do believe it's a combination of all those forces, but probably triggered by the individual. And as individuals, we are social animals. We like to follow leaders. We like to be led. And I think it's very important to rediscover our possibility to be leaders as well, leaders of our ideas, of our priorities, to stand up for what is important for us. And where do we learn that? We probably learn it with our parents, by their education, and definitely at education systems like the WU.
Thank you. And Brigitte, what would be your...
I can just fully sign up with
That's
what was
perfect.
said here.
It's a short
Perfect.
answer.
And I just want to add the investors' perspective.
Yeah,
Investors are also a very important driver of sustainability agenda, as they want to, so to say, ensure that the money they put into a company is the risks are known and transparently communicated and actions are implemented. Yeah.
Okay. And Teresa?
Also actually agreeing on the money part, because I do believe if there is a potential in terms of there is a market growing and then certain trends pick up. But nevertheless, yes, the mixture is true as well. But it's very much also a matter of communication, I think, because many information that we are talking about are actually 50 years old, learning the limits to growth report actually, and the academia knew what was going to happen and already knew that on many levels. So I do not believe it's just one single thing, but it actually has to be, I wouldn't actually, I hope it's not going to stay as a trend, but I would actually say that with certain also activities like or activist movements like Fridays for Future, etc., those are the things where people are, where this communication topic is being actually picked up by the masses. And this is actually what was needed and what will be even more needed in the future, that it just becomes as a daily topic where people actually do not only get scared, because this is definitely something that hinders us, I think, but actually feel hope and where they can move forward.
Thank you. And Sigrid, is it the economics professors or more management and international business?
Chimsky is a professor at Imperial College, and he's one of the co-authors of the 1.5 degree IPCC report. And he was asked at the press conference when they were presenting the report, so which is the most important measure of the ones that you have put into this report? And he said, forget the word or and replace it by and. So I agree with you that everybody needs to pull their weight, although there are some who can pull a bit more weight, like investors or business leaders. So I'm really happy about this collaboration across disciplines, not just economics, but also business, and with Günther's particular research focus. On the other hand, it does need knowledge. So of course, that's sort of the backbone, that's the very basis. Without that, it's really difficult because we don't know whether we're moving in the right direction. On the other hand, we've also been shown our limits, because climate science has been around for 40 years. Natural scientists have really, really pulled their weight. Economists still need to do a bit better, because what we've seen last year with the Nobel laureate and arguing that the optimal path is 4 degrees, I think there's still something in the paradigm which is a bit problematic, but we're working on that. However, what has been shown is that information is necessary, but it's the basis. What then is required, and that has been shown very, very intriguingly by Fridays for Future, it's the interests that need to be put on the table. Information is the basis, it needs to be there, we can build on that, but it's not enough, apparently, because we have advised business leaders for a long time, we have advised policy leaders for a long time along the lines of being more active in terms of climate action, and it's just not happened to the extent that we need it. But it's the direct language, the putting the interests of wanting to have a decent life of young people on the table, that is powerful. So we really need the combination of the different players, all of them coming together and pulling along the Sustainable Development Goals.
So this is direct answer to one of my students who asked if they can go protest on Black Friday.
Go for it.
With Fridays for Future,
Absolutely.
instead of shopping on Amazon.
It was yeah.
So if I could bribe the audience with free flow of wine afterwards, would you give us 8 minutes for discussion or so, for questions from you? Because we would really like to hear your questions. So we tried to go until about 7:35, if that works. And I don't know if there is a microphone going around, and we'll go straight to the questions, because I'm sure I'll have a lot of opportunities to thank you in person afterwards. Yes, I see one hand over there. I may need to stand up too.
Hi. Okay, so I'm not from the VU. I'm from Boku, actually. And to be honest, I'm studying environmental and bioresource management. So this is a topic that actually addresses my studies directly, more or less. And I just have a question to you, Ms. Birchler. Did you ever think about encouraging people to actually reduce their consumption of energy? Because that would be actually something that helps a lot.
Yes.
Yes, you can brag with you will be needed in the future as well, because I think you kind of will be a little bit, yes. But I think addressing people and telling them to reduce their energy consumption would be one of your main things to do. One of your main responsibilities. I don't know if you're doing anything in that direction, because I didn't really get that from you.
Okay. Yeah, actually we are also legally required to do that. There is an energy efficiency law in Austria, which requires companies like OMV to reduce their end energy consumption by 0.6% every year. I don't have now the terajoules, how much this is in my head, but we are selling a lot of energy, so 0.6% is a lot of energy. When you translate this into emission reductions, around 30,000 to 40,000 tons of CO2 emission reductions annually. So we are doing this by engaging with our clients and our contractors especially. We are doing, for example, economic drive training. Truck drivers, they come to a training which we offer with ÖMTC or ABÖ, institutions like this, and we train them how to drive the trucks, because they're professional driver, in a way that they reduce the consumption. One thing. We also do a lot of engagement at the filling stations and engaging with our customers how they can save fuel during driving. Yeah, this is all measured also by companies like TÜV. We are reporting publicly these measures, and we can also achieve and calculate a lot of emission reductions based on these measures. And this is a legal requirement. So 0.6% end energy consumption must be reduced annually. So other measures regards to this is, for example, I mean, heating oil. Okay, this has been already decided that we will phase out the support of changing heating oil boilers, oil heating boilers to more efficient new ones. We decided that we phase out this program by next year, but this had a significant impact, because hundreds of thousands of houses have still oil heating boilers in their houses. And we have supported this with money to replace it to a higher efficient oil boiler. Yeah? So, and this has generated a huge amount of reduction, of emission reduction, and also less product sales, for sure. Yeah? So we're doing this kind of initiatives. But I know in which directions is your question heading. It's this is the examples I can give you, so we don't. We have a focus also on these aspects, for sure. But it's, I mean, it's we're selling products. If you engage in this, telling your customers not to use your products anymore, it's also a little bit contradicting your business model. But still, we take up here the sustainability responsibility and engage with our customers and clients.
And I thought the hand up front was waiting for a while. First, yeah, and then we'll see the back.
So we've mentioned Fridays for Future quite a few times today, and it's also striking in front of the OMV headquarters next week. So we see that this is a big political issue. My question, however, is not for the OMV, it's for Sigrid Stagel. You said that climate science has been around for about 30, 40 years, and we haven't been able to trust corporations to just take ambitious climate action out of goodwill. So how can we implement political measures that obligate corporations to actually act in a sustainable and climate-friendly way? For example, a CO2 tax or other political measures.
Oh. It's a combination. On the one hand, of course, we need concepts and plans, for example, a national energy and climate plan that the government at the moment is finalizing and needs to submit to the European Commission soon. And that should be ambitious, that should be operationalized, and that should be budgeted. The current version that is under consultation at the moment is far from that. So how can the Austrian government, for example, just as a specific example, be motivated to do differently? On the one hand, it's of course, again, researchers giving the government a hand and suggesting measures of how it can be done, as it is done from evaluated and peer-reviewed journal articles, and making them aware of the latest findings that there are in different fields, in climate science as well as in climate economics. But I don't think it's only an information deficit problem, it's a question of power. And it's a question of whom to listen to, and it's even within the economy a question of whom to listen to, because there are some companies that are currently put at a disadvantage because of the social institutions that we have. They would do better, they would be able to move out of their niche if we had different institutions, if we had more climate action. And others who have more power at the moment and actually are influencing the government not to pull their weight, basically. Austria is a laggard in terms of climate policy, which is really frustrating. Denmark, within the last 8 years, has reduced its emissions by 35%. Whoa, it can be done, amazing. Austria has increased its emissions during that period, increased. I mean, can you imagine that? And that is at a time when we are already outside of the Holocene space. We don't actually know what we are doing. Austria has increased its emissions, and the temperature has increased by 1.8 degrees. In the whole Holocene, the whole 11,000 years, last 11,000 years, where most of human development has happened, we did not have more temperature change than 1 degree. So we don't know what we are doing. And policy is not reacting fast enough, and I think there it's important to be on the street. And Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, all of that is necessary in order to really hike the stake. And of course, we scientists, we really continue to write entries, and we're going to contribute to the consultation and all of that. That is also necessary. But it needs different aspects working together, and of course, business to pull their weight.
I would applaud, but very shortly. And we'll just take 2 more hands. I know there are a lot of them up, but you were in the back from before, and then this will be the last question. Yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chetin, and you are talking about the greater or ever-growing awareness of this topic, SDG 2030 goals. You mentioned the investor side, because the consumer side is important, but also the investor side is important. I am working at a management company, and I can tell you that we have some eco-labeling of investment funds, like from the Österreichische Umweltzeichen or the Nordic Fund since 2014, and FNG or European-wide. So what I see in my work is that we have not a penalty because of investing responsible or sustainable or impact investing or whatever you want to call it. So I see that the performance is not under penalty if you invest sustainable. So the performance I can see the charts, but I want to ask you, maybe Dr. Stagel as an economic researcher, can you see the impact of these investments? Because asset managers have ever-growing asset under management in these funds of responsible and sustainable funds, and they're investing a lot in ESG analysts, etc. So I would like to ask you, do you see the impact of these investments, and since they want to achieve these SDG 2030 goals? Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, the finance sector has a tremendous impact on the real economy, and we've seen that for the last 20 years. Of course, what decisions are being made in the finance sector are tremendously important. And what we have seen recently is a lot of cases which started with the divestment strategies of students trying to motivate their universities, mostly US universities, because public universities don't tend to have portfolios of a significant scale, to move out of industries that are not sustainable. And I think a lot of initiatives have been following suit. Also unions and other employee organizations negotiating with their pension funds, pushing them towards impact investment, really. So there's big scale shifts going on as we speak. But that leads to the problem of stranded assets. And they are big. They are trillions of dollars worldwide, and they are standing in the way of making the changes that we need. It was not climate science finding out the best model or the best data for 20 years, and this is why we needed 20 international climate negotiation rounds. It was more the stranded assets that stood in the way. So we need to think about ways of how to deal with that. I don't know, do we need to compensate the owners of these assets that will be stranded because of active climate policy? I don't know. Not enough research is going into that.
So actually, you know what, if you mind, please ask us that question afterwards, and I'm sure all the panelists will still stick around for a while. So this is wonderful, the number of hands. Please just join us after. We have, as I said, drinks and some salty snacks over there in foyer, and we'll just stay as long as you want us to. I want to thank all of you for being here, for not being scared away by the presentation in English, and specifically thank all of our panelists with one more round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.